now. So over 5,000 new cases nationally, Western Cape carrying the brunt of the latest infections. And the province has recorded a whopping 1,773 new cases, with Gauteng recording just over 1,000 new cases. I'm joined now by Director of the Vaccines and Infectious Diseases Analytical Research Unit, Professor Shabir Madhi from Wits University Prof. Thank you very much for your time. So these numbers, 5,575 cases nationally, that's really low. Is that a typical Monday scenario, or are we anyway on a decline?
Good evening. So those numbers are obviously very much, as you mentioned, probably a result of decreased testing over the course of the weekend. I think the more important metric is the positivity rate. And although at the national level it is 22%, in the Western Cape as well as many other provinces, it's still above 30%. Sure. And that is not a good sign. What we do expect is the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, as an example, they were about 3 to 4 weeks behind the curve compared with the resurgence that occurred in Gauteng. So the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal are still as yet to peak. So the numbers themselves, the absolute numbers, aren't too useful. I think a more important metric is the positivity rate as well as hospitalization. And that is unfortunately still on the increase in the Western Cape as well as in KZN.
It's interesting what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal, 981 new infections. I think it was Prof. Mosabela who said to me that he was tracking what the Eastern Cape was doing as a comparison with KZN. But the Eastern Cape is a lot lower. It's on 437. Do you think that the Eastern Cape is that much lower because they had a very rough second wave compared to KwaZulu-Natal? Or do you think KwaZulu-Natal's numbers are up because of all the unrest we saw a few weeks back?
So KwaZulu-Natal's numbers are up, and they'll continue increasing probably for another 2 to 3 weeks, and that includes hospitalization and death. The difficulty of making head-to-head comparisons between provinces, again, relates to the differential when it comes to the testing rate and who is being tested. So I would guard against making any direct comparisons between provinces or across provinces. Again, I think a more important metric is a positivity rate, because it really tells us in which direction infections are going. And I'm not too clear about the rest of the Eastern Cape right now with regard to their positivity rate. But just a cautionary note when making those sort of head-to-head comparisons. Obviously, the population also differs in size. Gauteng, as an example, makes up 25% of South Africa's population. So when we see a big increase in Gauteng, it might be a consequence of population size more than anything else as well.
So it's important to keep that in mind when looking at the numbers. Of course, the deaths, 246 new deaths, that is still high. It's not as high as we saw last week, where we had a couple of days over 500, but it's quite a jump from the previous day. And that is something that stays with us, sadly, fairly consistently as we go through this third wave. I want to speak to you a little bit about our vaccinations. You know, it seems like we're making great progress. We saw more deliveries of vaccines over the weekend. There's over 2.5 million doses coming from the United States tomorrow. It's all great news. We're hitting really high targets. But at the same time, we're hearing that we might need a second dose if you've had the one Johnson & Johnson dose. You might need a third dose if you have the Pfizer dose. Are we just going to be playing this vaccination game with more boosters as we go? And if you need a third dose of Pfizer, how soon do you think it would be required?
So, Sally, I think the most important thing is, what are we trying to achieve with COVID-19 vaccines? Are we trying to prevent infections, and are we trying to prevent mild illness? Or are we trying to protect against severe disease and hospitalization? And for all intents and purposes, COVID-19 vaccines, unfortunately, is not going to get us to herd immunity, which essentially means it's not really going to work that well against mild infection, but it works tremendously against severe disease. And it actually sustains and maintains its protection against severe disease. So if we are wanting to protect against severe disease, we're not going to require repeat boosters as often as Pfizer, as an example, is intending to do. We might require boosters every 2 to 3 years, and particularly for high-risk individuals. But if we're really trying to prevent infection and mild disease, then we probably require boosters every 6 to 9 months, which simply is not pragmatic. So I think we need to move away from wanting just to prevent infections, and the focus has to be on preventing severe disease. And that sort of a goal will make it more meaningful as to when we would require boosters and how frequent. And like I said, in that case, the model indicates we probably would only require boosters every 2 to 3 years rather than every 6 to 9 months.
All right, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. Professor Shabir Madhi, Rector of the Vaccines and Infectious Diseases Analytical Research Unit.